Nobody expects their life to change on a frozen night. But that's exactly what happened to Matthew Henderson as he drove the winding back roads home through the pitch-black Vermont woods, the heater in his battered Subaru blasting against the January cold. The world outside was a blur of swirling snow and skeletal birch trees. Every rut and pothole in the old road rattled his bones, but Matt hardly cared. He was numb in more ways than one. 45, newly divorced, his farmhouse echoing with silence, the weight of loneliness settling heavier each night. Matt's thoughts spun as he drove, replaying arguments with his ex-wife, missed chances, all the memories he couldn't escape. Even the music on the radio seemed to mock him. He reached over, switching it off with a sigh, just as his headlights swept across something small and pale on the shoulder. A flash of movement, almost invisible against the snow. He slammed the brakes. The car fishtailed, tires squealing on ice. His heart shot to his throat. For a split second he thought he'd imagined it. But there, by the guardrail, a shivering bundle. A kitten? A fox? Instinct kicked in. Matt flung open his door, boots crunching on snow. The wind sliced through his jacket, stinging his cheeks. He called out, half hoping whatever it was would run off and spare him the trouble. But the creature didn't move. He jogged closer, every step a thud in the quiet night. The animal was tiny, just a kitten, but with tufted ears, oversized paws, and a wild, bristling coat that didn't belong to any house cat Matt had ever seen. Its eyes, huge and gold, rimmed with panic, locked onto his. The thing hissed, a dry rasp, but didn't flee. At that moment, headlights rounded the curve behind him, blinding white in the dark. Matt's heart hammered as the car barreled toward them, horn blaring. He grabbed the kitten just as the car swerved, skidding by with a burst of cold air, and curses shouted from an open window. He stumbled backward, clutching the struggling animal to his chest, breath puffing out in panicked clouds. Matt bundled the kitten inside his coat, feeling its sharp little claws rake his arm through his flannel shirt. The creature was freezing, every bone trembling. He pressed it close, murmuring nonsense, hoping to calm it, or himself. "Easy, buddy. I got you. It's okay. It's okay." But his hands were shaking nearly as much as the kitten. For a second, Matt stood in the road, snowflakes sticking to his hair and lashes, his heart pounding with a wildness he hadn't felt in years. Was this some rare breed? A stray? Or something more dangerous? Vermont was full of legends. Ghost cats, wild things slipping through the shadows. He wondered, absurdly, if he was about to be mauled by a baby lynx. But looking down at the little face peeking from his coat, he only saw terror and helplessness. The drive back to the farmhouse felt endless. Every so often, Matt glanced down at his coat, feeling the kitten's rapid heartbeat against his chest. The silence in the car was thick, punctuated by the kitten's soft whimpers and the whistle of wind through cracked seals in the doors. When he reached home, the world was silent, the kind of silence that only comes in deep winter after a storm. Matt hesitated on his porch, fumbling for his keys with numb fingers. The porch light illuminated the snow drifting down in lazy spirals. He shivered, not from cold, but from the adrenaline still surging through his veins. Inside, his 3 cats, Pepper, Luna, and Socks, watched from the shadows with wide, curious eyes. Pepper, the oldest, a sharp-eyed tuxedo cat, growled low in her throat. Luna, gentle tabby, flattened her ears, while Socks, white with gray patches, darted behind the sofa. Matt ignored their protests for now. He set his coat and its wild bundle gently on the worn couch. The kitten immediately tried to bolt, but Matt cupped his hands around it, careful, gentle, but firm. He finally got a good look. Short tail, tufted ears, dappled fur. A bobcat kitten, surely. His pulse kicked up again. He'd seen photos online, but never up close. Was it legal to keep a wild animal? Was it safe? The questions buzzed in his head, but the kitten was so small, so cold. He couldn't turn it out into the storm. Matt wrapped the kitten in an old towel, setting it by the heater. He rummaged in the kitchen, microwaving a bowl of water, pouring it into a mug for warmth. The kitten wouldn't drink, just glared and hissed, but didn't try to run. For a long moment, they watched each other. The lonely man and the wild little creature, both unsure what to do next. He thought of calling animal control, but it was nearly midnight. He thought of the rumors, bobcats attacking chickens, lurking near schoolyards. But looking at the kitten, Matt saw only fear and need. He decided then and there to keep the creature safe, at least for tonight. Matt sat by the heater, exhausted but unable to sleep, listening to the kitten's tiny breaths, the storm rattling the windows, and the distant yowls of his confused cats. He had no idea what the coming days would bring, but for the first time in years, he felt needed, really needed. Something wild and wonderful had crashed into his life, and as he finally drifted into a restless sleep, he held tight to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Little did Matt know, the rescue on that snowy road would be the start of a journey that would test his heart, his courage, and his very idea of what it means to be a family. The storm had passed, but inside Matthew Henderson's farmhouse, the real chaos was just beginning. Dawn crept in through frosted windows, and Matt sat on the living room floor, bleary-eyed, cradling a mug of stale coffee as he watched the bobcat kitten huddle beneath the old radiator. The tiny creature, who he'd started calling Rowdy, though he hadn't said it aloud, hadn't slept at all. Every small noise sent Rowdy's ears swiveling. Every creak of the house made him shrink further back. Matt's 3 cats watched with a mix of suspicion, indignation, and awe. Pepper, his bold tuxedo queen, was first to approach. She padded forward, fur puffed, eyes narrowed. "Not a chance," Matt muttered. But Pepper pressed on, stopping just inches from Rowdy and unleashing a growl that rumbled through the room. Rowdy responded with a spitting hiss, arching his back, wild eyes wide. Luna and Socks, less brave, kept their distance. Luna hiding behind a stack of firewood, Socks perched nervously atop the armchair. Matt's heart ached watching his gentle home turn tense. "Let's all just breathe," he whispered, as if any of them were listening. His voice was rough, sleep-deprived. The last few hours had been spent searching the internet. Was it even legal to keep a bobcat? How to care for one? Every answer he found seemed to contradict the last. Some forums told stories of bobcat kittens growing up affectionate and playful. Others warned of destruction, aggression, disaster. He pushed the laptop away. He'd promised himself to keep Rowdy safe until he figured out what to do. But he hadn't counted on the mayhem of introducing wildness into a world that had always been tame. A sudden crash jerked him from his thoughts. Socks, in an attempt to get a better view, had tipped over a potted fern. Dirt and leaves scattered across the faded rug. Pepper lunged at the sound, and Rowdy, wild with panic, darted from beneath the radiator, straight up the curtains, in a blur of fur and claws. Matt watched, mouth open, as the kitten scaled the drapes, sending dust motes spinning in the early light. Pepper leapt after him, but Matt lunged forward, scooping Pepper away just as Rowdy reached the curtain rod, perching there like a tiny mountain lion. "Rowdy, hey, easy, buddy," Matt pleaded, stepping gingerly across the debris. The Bobcat Kitten froze. Claws sunk into the old fabric, tail lashing. Luna peeked out, eyes huge, then melted back into shadow. Matt knew one wrong move could send Rowdy flying, so he did the only thing he could think of. He sat down, legs crossed, and waited. For a long minute, the room was silent except for the slow drip of water from the overturned plant and the rasp of Rowdy's quick breaths. Eventually, the kitten crept down, landing with a thump on the arm of the couch. He scuttled beneath it, vanishing into the darkness. Matt let out a long breath. "Guess we're all a little on edge this morning," he said, voice trembling with exhausted amusement. The rest of the day unfolded in fits and starts, a ballet of chaos and compromise. Matt tried coaxing Rowdy out with bits of leftover chicken and sardines. The kitten would dart forward, snatch the food, and retreat to the safety of his fortress beneath the sofa. Pepper stalked back and forth, keeping vigil, her tail flicking like a metronome of disapproval. Socks, ever the goofball, attempted to initiate play by batting a toy mouse toward Rowdy's hiding spot, only to jump back with a squeal when Rowdy let out a warning growl. Luna was the first to soften. By afternoon, she crept closer, settling herself nearby with a gentle rumble in her throat. She lay on her side, stretching luxuriously as if to show Rowdy there was nothing to fear. Matt watched in awe. "You're braver than I am, Luna," he murmured, but not all was peace. That evening, as Matt prepared a makeshift litter box for Rowdy, Pepper staged a rebellion. She leapt onto the kitchen counter, swatting at Matt's arm as he reached for a can of cat food, her protest loud and unmistakable. I know," he sighed. "This isn't how I thought my week would go either." His arms bore the scratches to prove it. At one point, Rowdy darted into the bathroom, knocking over a basket of towels and splashing through the water bowl, leaving muddy prints across the tile. Matt could only laugh, the absurdity of it all washing away his nerves. When night fell, Matt curled up on the living room rug, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He watched as the three cats formed a wary semicircle around the edge of the room. Rowdy nestled under the coffee table, golden eyes shining from the darkness. He felt the weight of his decision settling over him, the responsibility, the uncertainty, the wonder. He knew he could call animal control in the morning. He could drive Rowdy to the nearest wildlife center. But as he listened to the kitten's breathing, heard the soft pad of paws and the occasional low growl, he felt something shift inside him. Matt realized he'd been running from his own wildness for years, playing it safe, staying small. Now, as Rowdy's presence turned his quiet world upside down, Matt sensed that chaos might just be the thing he needed. The house was different now, charged with energy, unpredictable, alive. As the fire crackled low and the storm picked up again outside, Matt whispered a silent promise to the Bobcat Kitten, to his three confused cats, and maybe even to himself. "We'll figure this out. Somehow we'll make room for the wild, for all of us." He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he was excited to find out. By morning, the world outside was gone, buried beneath a thick, silent blanket of snow. The storm that had threatened all night had delivered its promise. A blizzard raged beyond the windows, wind howling through the eaves and driving drifts up against the porch. Henderson House, already remote, now felt utterly cut off from the rest of Vermont. In that little farmhouse, the four cats and their anxious human hunkered down, the outside world reduced to a swirling white void. Matt woke with a jolt, stiff from a night spent dozing on the couch. For a moment, he forgot why he felt so unsettled, until a flicker of movement under the coffee table reminded him. Rowdy was still there, curled tightly around himself, one wild gold eye peeking out from beneath a paw. Matt listened. Pepper, Luna, and Socks were quiet for once, each tucked into their favorite corners, all keeping a wary distance from the newcomer. The power flickered once, twice, and then settled into a low, steady hum. Matt counted his blessings. He put on a pot of coffee, the simple routine steadying his nerves. The kitchen smelled of brewing grounds and last night's wood smoke, oddly comforting. He fixed breakfast for the cats first, portioning out kibble and spooning tuna onto 4 plates. For Rowdy, he minced some leftover roast chicken. He didn't know what bobcats were supposed to eat, but Rowdy was still too small for anything wild. Cautiously, Matt set the plate near Rowdy's hiding spot. "Here you go, little guy. You're safe." Rowdy crept forward, pausing every few inches, as if expecting a trap. The other cats watched, Pepper's tail twitching, Luna's eyes wide and gentle, Socks's nose twitching with curiosity. Rowdy gulped the food down, barely chewing, then vanished back under the table, not trusting any of them yet. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait out the storm, Matt settled in for a long day. He turned off his phone, no signal anyway, and pulled out an old leather-bound journal, a habit he'd abandoned since the divorce. The pages still held remnants of his old life, lists of chores, notes from counseling sessions, scrawled hopes for a future that had never arrived. He wrote about the night rescue, about the impossible mix of fear and wonder that Rowdy brought. He wrote about his loneliness, the ache that sat in his chest even in a room full of living things. And as he wrote, the walls seemed to close in a little less. Outside, the snow kept falling, wind rattling the windows. Inside, the hours passed in fits and starts. Rowdy dozed, waking at every sound. Pepper prowled the perimeter, occasionally creeping closer, always stopping short with a warning growl. Luna seemed to sense the tension and, in her gentle way, began inching closer to Rowdy each time he emerged to eat. Socks, emboldened by boredom, started rolling toys across the floor, sometimes batting one so close to Rowdy that the Bobcat Kitten would lunge out and swat it back. A fleeting, clumsy game that made Matt smile in spite of himself. By afternoon, the storm grew fiercer. The power went out, plunging the house into a quiet gloom broken only by the pop and hiss of the wood stove. Matt built up the fire and spread blankets on the living room floor, inviting the cats in for warmth. To his surprise, Luna was the first to venture near Rowdy, lying down a careful arm's length away, her body relaxed, her purr a low, soothing thrum. Rowdy watched, tense but curious, inching closer as the hours crawled by. As dusk fell, the world outside was muffled and gray. Matt pulled a chair close to the fire and watched his strange little family. Socks, unable to resist, wriggled close to Luna and stretched out a paw, tentatively booping Rowdy's nose. Rowdy flinched, but did not run. Pepper, sensing a truce, leaped onto the window ledge and settled in to keep watch. For the first time since Rowdy's arrival, peace settled over the house. An uneasy, fragile peace, but peace all the same. Matt felt a stirring in his chest, something like hope. He scribbled in his journal, "We're all stuck together now. Me, the cats, and the wild little thing I found on a night I almost gave up on miracles. Maybe this storm is a gift. Maybe it's forcing us to figure out how to share our shelter, how to trust each other even when we're scared. Night came early, pressing black against the windows. The firelight flickered, throwing golden shapes across the walls. Matt made soup and ate it cross-legged on the floor, sharing bites with Luna and Socks, tossing a scrap to Rowdy when he thought no one was looking. The kitten caught it and gnawed hungrily, eyes never leaving Matt's face. Later, as the wind screamed outside, Matt stretched out beside the hearth, the cats forming a ragged circle around him. Rowdy, exhausted from the day's trials, crept closer than ever before, close enough that Matt could feel his warmth, could hear his breath. Matt whispered into the darkness, a promise to himself as much as to them. We'll ride this storm out together. We're all a little lost, but maybe that's what makes us a family, just trying to find shelter together when the world turns wild. In the quiet that followed, the soft sound of Rowdy breathing, safe and warm beside the fire, was the only music Matt needed. For the first time in months, he felt the heavy ache in his heart ease. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Days blurred into one another as the blizzard barricaded Henderson House from the outside world. Matt, once restless and anxious for escape, now settled into a quiet rhythm, one dictated not by clocks or obligations, but by the needs and moods of his unlikely little family. The initial tension between Rowdy and the domestic shorthairs had not disappeared, but it had transformed. Each member of the household, human and feline, learned to read the room with a subtlety that surprised even Matt. He became a student in his own home, observing every shift of tail and flick of ear. Rowdy had established a small territory behind the wood box near the fireplace, but each day, that territory grew a little. Pepper, fiercely proud, kept her distance, watching Rowdy with hooded eyes, yet never outright attacking. Luna, always gentle, became a silent bridge, her presence inviting rather than demanding. Socks, with his perpetual kittenish mischief, was the first to test the boundary of play. One late morning, as sunlight cut weak gold lines across the floorboards, Matt decided it was time for careful introductions. He sat on the rug, legs folded beneath him, cradling a mug of tea and a handful of treats. He coaxed Luna and Socks near Rowdy's den, scattering treats at intervals, a breadcrumb trail of cautious trust. Luna moved first, slow and steady, pausing with each step to look at Rowdy as if asking permission. Socks, unable to resist the lure of food, bounded ahead, batting a treat and rolling on his back, hoping for a game. Rowdy's wild eyes tracked every movement, ears swiveling between curiosity and suspicion. He inched out, drawn by Luna's calm energy and the tantalizing scent of food. There, in a pool of sunlight, the three cats sat within touching distance. Luna purring softly, Socks chirping, Rowdy crouched low, ready to bolt, but unable to resist the comfort of company. Matt held his breath, daring to hope. He watched as Luna, ever the diplomat, took a bold step and sniffed Rowdy's ear. There was a long, electric pause. Then Rowdy didn't hiss. Instead, he simply blinked, slow and uncertain. Socks, emboldened by Luna's success, extended a playful paw. Rowdy, after a moment's hesitation, tapped it back. The exchange was clumsy, fleeting, but it was something, an opening. The first few words in a new language none of them had spoken before. The rest of the day unfolded like a fragile truce. Matt went about his chores quietly, always watching out of the corner of his eye. He filled food bowls, swept up litter, and kept the fire stoked. The cats navigated around each other, Luna leading with a patient dignity. Socks risking ever bolder overtures of play, Rowdy responding with growing curiosity. Pepper remained aloof, but her vigilance softened as the hours passed. She even allowed herself a nap atop Matt's bookshelf, high above the fray, queenly and secure. As Matt observed his household, he felt something loosen inside himself. For so long, he'd been convinced that caring meant control. Rules, routines, careful management of every little disaster. But now he saw the beauty of letting go, of creating space for each cat to be fully themselves. The house, once ruled by order and caution, pulsed with life. Wild, unpredictable, sometimes loud, but honest in a way he hadn't known he needed. That evening, Matt found himself drawn to the piano in the corner, a battered upright he hadn't touched since the divorce. He sat down and played, letting his fingers stumble through old jazz standards and scraps of memory. The cats gathered, drawn by the strange sounds. Even Rowdy, startled at first, slunk close to listen. Matt played quietly, letting the music fill the house, and for a few rare minutes, every tension dissolved. Afterward, Matt pulled out his journal and wrote, "Trust isn't something you can force. You can't make wildness tame, and maybe you shouldn't try. True care is about giving space. For difference, for fear, for curiosity. Maybe love isn't about turning Rowdy into a house cat. Maybe it's about making a home where he can stay wild and safe at the same time." Later, Matt watched as the three short hairs stretched out in the evening light. Luna pressed close to Rowdy, sharing a sunbeam near the window. Socks tried to teach Rowdy to chase the red dot from a laser pointer, darting back and forth with wild abandon, while Rowdy watched, fascinated and unsure. Pepper, always the dignified elder, surveyed her domain with a regal air, content for now to be an observer rather than a participant. Matt's heart ached with gratitude for the small, wordless miracles unfolding under his roof. The storm outside had become less threatening, more like a distant memory. Inside, wildness and gentleness existed side by side. Not perfectly, not without tension, but with a growing respect for each other's nature. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the cats breathing in the next room, Matt realized that something fundamental had shifted. He no longer felt the urge to fix everything. It was enough to witness these moments, to be present for the delicate, slow work of learning each other's language. In the dark, with the storm finally fading, Matt whispered a silent thanks, not just for the safety of his cats and the roof over their heads, but for the wildness he had learned to welcome. Sometimes, he realized, the bravest thing you can do is make room for what you don't understand. And with that, sleep came, gentle, dreamless, and long overdue. Spring arrived in Vermont with a wild rush, the river out back roaring with melted snow, the maples dripping sweet sap, the first shoots of green piercing through the muddy yard. In Henderson House, Matt's little family found a new rhythm, each day weaving fresh threads of trust and chaos. The blizzard was a memory now, but something had shifted forever between Matt, his three house cats, and Rowdy, the wild little bobcat, whose arrival had turned everything upside down. Matt's farmhouse was never quiet anymore. Rowdy had grown braver, his eyes bright with mischief, paws quicker and stronger. He'd learned to leap onto windowsills, to stalk sunbeams with a silent, predatory grace, and to chase Socks from one end of the living room to the other. The domestic cats, Pepper with her wary pride, Luna with her gentle patience, and Socks with his boundless energy, had settled into a wary truce with their wild housemate. Some days they played, some days they circled each other like rivals on a chessboard. But Matt saw the change in all of them. They were braver, more alive, more complicated than before. It was a bright Saturday when everything went sideways. Matt, in sweatpants and muddy boots, had propped open the back door to air out the house. He was lost in thought, wiping down counters and humming under his breath, when a sudden racket shattered the peace. A deep, angry bark, the unmistakable sound of a dog loose in the yard. Before Matt could even react, Rowdy was gone. In a blur of fur and claws, the Bobcat Kitten shot across the kitchen, through the cat door, and into the muddy backyard. Pepper, always fiercely protective, dashed after him, with Socks hot on her heels. Luna stayed behind, trembling under the kitchen table, eyes huge with worry. "Rowdy! Pepper! Socks!" Matt's shout echoed off the porch as he bolted outside, feet sinking into cold, wet grass. His heart hammered in his chest, panic hot and sharp. He could see the neighbor's dog, Milo, a massive yellow mutt, barking and charging along the fence line, his leash trailing in the mud. Rowdy was cornered near the woodpile, his back arched, fur fluffed twice his size, ears flat against his head. Pepper stood in front of Rowdy, hissing with all the fury of a wildcat twice her size. Socks, not nearly as brave but loyal to the bone, bounced nervously at Pepper's side, meowing a frantic chorus. Matt's breath fogged in the cool morning air as he sprinted across the yard, slipping and nearly falling in the mud. "Back! Get back!" he yelled at Milo, who lunged closer, barking so loud it rattled the windows. Matt threw himself between the dog and his cats, grabbing for the leash and nearly losing his balance. Milo snapped and twisted, but Matt held on tight, yanking the big dog back with all his strength. In the chaos, Rowdy tried to dart for the safety of the porch, but his muddy paws slipped. He tumbled into a pile of old leaves, hissing and spitting. Pepper darted after him, standing guard, her eyes never leaving the dog. Socks, in a sudden burst of courage, batted at Milo's nose, just enough to distract the dog for a split second. It was enough. Matt managed to drag Milo toward the fence, wrestling the leash free from a tangled branch and hooking it over the post. He scooped up Socks first, pressing the trembling cat to his chest. Then he turned to Rowdy, who froze, eyes wild and unsure. Matt knelt in the mud, arms open. "Come here, Rowdy. It's okay. I've got you." For a long second, time hung suspended. Rowdy's ears twitched. Pepper made a low, rumbling growl. Then, as if something deep inside surrendered, Rowdy bolted into Matt's arms. Matt hugged him close, breathing in the sharp scent of wet fur and wildness, heart pounding with relief. The whole rescue was over in minutes, but it felt like hours. Mud streaked Matt's jeans and hands, and his heart wouldn't slow down. He gathered all 3 cats and carried them inside, his arms aching but his spirit flooded with gratitude. Luna rushed out from under the table to nuzzle her siblings, her purrs vibrating through the kitchen. Matt closed the door, leaning back against it, eyes squeezed shut. For the first time, he realized just how fragile this new family was, how easily it could all be lost. He sank to the floor, his 4 cats pressing close, each in their own way saying, "Thank you. I'm here. We're safe." But their ordeal was far from private. Across the street, a neighbor had filmed the entire escape on her phone. Matt floundering in the mud, Rowdy cornered by the dog, the strange sight of a bobcat and 3 house cats rallying together in the face of danger. By evening, the video was everywhere in Maple Hollow. Comments ranged from awed to horrified. "Is that a wild bobcat in Henderson's yard? Someone call animal control. That man's a hero. Look at those cats protect each other." Matt read the posts, his face burning. Some folks called him reckless, others called him brave. A few children knocked at his door, eyes wide with curiosity, wanting to know if they could meet the wild kitten. Matt wasn't sure what to say. For the first time, the private world he'd built with his cats, and with Rowdy, had burst into public view. That night, as the house finally quieted, Matt sat on the floor with his cats, petting each in turn, Rowdy last of all. He realized that family wasn't about blood or rules or even safety. It was about facing the wild together, whatever that meant. He looked out at the moonlit yard, muddy and trampled but strangely beautiful. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring questions. But tonight, as Rowdy fell asleep beside him, Matt let the world shrink to this. One wild heart, 4 loyal cats, and the courage to keep them safe. The events of the backyard escape had done more than muddy up Matt's genes. They'd kicked open the doors of his private world. Within hours, the video shot by his neighbor had gone local viral. Maple Hollow was small, but word spread fast. Before long, Matt's phone buzzed with messages, some from old friends laughing in disbelief, others warning him about the dangers of harboring a wild animal. Even the town's Facebook group lit up with debates and opinions, each more heated than the last. On Monday morning, Matt found a folded note tucked under his windshield wiper. "That's a wild animal, Henderson. You're going to get someone hurt." No signature, just a scribbled warning. That afternoon, another envelope appeared in his mailbox, this one with shaky handwriting. "Thank you for taking care of that little bobcat. My grandkids love seeing your animals." The notes kept coming, some anonymous, some openly supportive, a few edged with fear and threats. Matt pinned the kind ones to his fridge, letting the words of gratitude anchor him when the criticism got too sharp. He tried to keep life at home as normal as possible, but it was impossible to ignore the shift. When he ran errands, neighbors eyed him with curiosity or concern. At the hardware store, Mrs. Adler cornered him by the paint samples, asking whether Rowdy had tried to eat any of his other cats yet. "No, ma'am," Matt answered, forcing a smile. "He's more interested in chasing sunbeams and learning how to nap." Her lips pursed, clearly unconvinced. The town's children were the most enchanted. Every afternoon, a cluster of them pressed up against his picket fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of Rowdy lounging on the porch. Matt felt torn, proud that his little misfit family had inspired wonder, anxious about being the center of a debate he never wanted to join. A few days after the video went live, Animal Control knocked on Matt's door. Officer Green was a broad-shouldered woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice. She eyed Rowdy with professional curiosity, then asked to see his vaccination records and papers. Matt admitted the truth. "He's not registered. He's a wild bobcat. I rescued him during a storm. I wasn't sure what else to do." Officer Green nodded, sighing. "You're not the first person in this town with a soft spot for strays, Matt. But you need to understand, keeping a bobcat as a pet is against state regulations, unless you register him as an exotic. There are safety concerns, and some of your neighbors—" She paused, glancing at a crumpled flyer on Matt's coffee table. "Aren't too happy about it." Matt's stomach twisted. He knew she was right. "So what happens now?" he asked. She handed him a packet of forms. "If you want to keep him, you need to register Rowdy, set up proper enclosures, and let us inspect your property. Otherwise, we'll have to place him with a sanctuary. And Matt, if something happens, even a scratch to a neighbor's kid, this could get ugly fast." Matt nodded, clutching the paperwork. After Officer Green left, he sat in silence for a long time. Rowdy, sensing the change in energy, slunk over and pressed against his leg. The other cats gathered close. Pepper glared at the closed door, as if daring anyone to challenge their family. Luna hopped into Matt's lap, purring with an unwavering gentleness. Socks curled up beside Rowdy, his tail wrapping around the bobcat's side. The town's scrutiny weighed on Matt like an avalanche, but the loyalty of his little crew gave him strength. He stayed up late that night, filling out forms, poring over requirements for fencing and permits, researching safe ways to create a haven for Rowdy that would ease his neighbors' fears without robbing the bobcat of his wildness. Every so often, he glanced at the fridge, rereading the kind notes to remind himself why this mattered. The next few days brought more pressure and more support. Some people left bags of cat food or small toys on Matt's porch, along with handwritten cards. "Keep fighting for Rowdy," or "Thank you for showing us that different isn't dangerous." Others, however, weren't so subtle. A sign appeared in his front yard, staked there in the dark, reading "Save our kids, no wild cats in Maple Hollow." Matt yanked it up, jaw clenched, then tossed it in the shed. But he also found allies in unexpected places. Mrs. Kwan, his elderly neighbor who raised chickens, dropped off fresh eggs and asked about Rowdy's favorite foods. Tom, the mailman, confided that his own dog had been a rescue, wild and scared until given a chance. "You're doing the right thing, Matt," Tom said quietly, "even if folks don't see it yet." One evening, after a long day battling bureaucracy and town gossip, Matt sat on the porch steps, the sun setting in streaks of purple and gold. Rowdy flopped beside him, head resting on Matt's knee, purring with a deep, rumbling contentment. The house cats clustered nearby, Pepper watchful, Luna pressed close, Socks sprawled lazily in the cool air. Matt stroked Rowdy's fur and whispered, "We're not giving up. You belong here just as much as any of us." The words felt brave, even as doubt gnawed at him. Could he really pull this off? Could he convince the town and himself that there was room for wildness, for something different in Maple Hollow? That night, Matt pinned the latest note to the fridge, a child's crayon drawing of Rowdy, his cats, and a smiling sun overhead. Underneath, in wobbly letters, it read, "Thank you for saving the wild kitty." Matt stood a little taller, his resolve burning bright. Whatever the future held, he'd fight for Rowdy's right to call Henderson House home. It was the kind of storm that made even the bravest old-timers in Maple Hollow mutter prayers before bed. Thunder rattled the glass panes in Matt's farmhouse. Lightning split the sky like a warning, and rain fell in thick sheets that turned the yard into a churning sea of mud. Matt, exhausted by weeks of fighting for Rowdy's place in the world, had just managed to drift into uneasy sleep when the power snapped off with a loud pop, plunging the house into a blackness so deep it felt alive. The silence was instantly broken by a yowl, a sharp, frightened cry that cut through the night. Matt shot upright in bed, heart pounding. He heard paws thumping, the sound of claws scrambling across hardwood. For a wild, dizzy moment, it seemed like every fear he'd tried to ignore had finally arrived at once. He grabbed his flashlight and raced for the living room, nearly tripping over Socks, who bolted past in a blur of white fur. Lightning flashed, illuminating a wild scene. Luna pressed against the front door, Pepper pacing with her tail bristling, and the cat door swinging wildly on its hinges. Rowdy was gone. "No, no, no," Matt muttered, shoving his feet into boots and grabbing his raincoat. He barely noticed the cold water sloshing over his toes as he pushed out into the downpour, calling Rowdy's name over and over. The wind nearly tore the words from his mouth. Behind him, Socks and Luna streaked past, refusing to be left behind. Even Pepper, always the dignified sentinel, slunk out into the yard, eyes burning with determination. The storm was chaos. Matt's flashlight beam danced across twisted branches and glinting puddles, the world reduced to shadow and flash. "Rowdy!" he yelled, voice hoarse. No answer but the wind and the pounding rain. He crashed through brambles, heart hammering so loud it drowned out the thunder. Each time lightning struck, he caught glimpses of movement. Was that Rowdy's wild silhouette, or just his fear playing tricks on him? Suddenly he heard it, a faint, desperate cry from under the old Miller porch across the street. Without thinking, Matt sprinted through the flooded road, slipping in the mud, landing hard on his knees. He ignored the sting of gravel and scrambled toward the sound. Luna and Socks were already there, crawling into the narrow space beneath the porch. Matt dropped to his stomach, shining his light into the darkness. There they were, 3 sodden cats pressed together, eyes shining back at him. Pepper, fur matted and filthy, was licking Rowdy's head, her body curled protectively around him. Luna and Socks pressed in close, offering what warmth they could. Rowdy's golden eyes were huge with fear, but he didn't bolt. Not this time. Matt stretched out his hand, voice shaking. "Come on, Rowdy, let's get you home." For a heartbeat, everything paused. The storm, the fear, the world itself. Then Rowdy crept forward, inch by inch, trusting Matt in the only way a wild animal can. Socks and Luna followed, sticking close. Pepper moved last, her glare warning Matt that she was allowing this only on her own terms. Carrying all 4 cats was impossible, so Matt cradled Rowdy and Socks in his jacket, trudging back through the rain, with Luna at his heels and Pepper trailing behind, regal even when soaked. The wind clawed at his face, lightning illuminating their procession like a scene from a dream. Back inside, Matt dried each cat one by one, hands shaking not from cold, but from relief and adrenaline. Pepper shook herself off and stalked to her perch. Luna curled on a blanket, Socks kneaded Matt's shoulder. Rowdy, for the first time since coming to Henderson House, stayed in Matt's lap, pressed against his chest, his breath a quick flutter. The storm raged on, but inside there was a warmth stronger than any thunder. Matt realized, in that strange, tender moment, that wildness and loyalty could live side by side, that the untamed heart didn't mean a heart alone. He looked at his motley crew, battered, brave, loyal beyond all reason. He knew now that family was built not on blood or rules, but on standing together in the worst of storms. Later, when the rain finally eased, Matt sat with his cats and wrote in his journal by the flickering glow of a single candle. "Tonight, I saw what love really is. Not a thing you control or tame or bend to your will, but something you protect, something you follow out into the dark, something you shelter when the world is loud and wild and dangerous. Rowdy isn't tamed, but he trusts. And in that trust, I think we're all a little more whole." Outside, the sky was clearing. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, just like the wildness in Rowdy's golden eyes, just like the fierce love that bound them all together. After the storm, everything in Maple Hollow seemed cleaner, fresher, like the world itself had taken a deep breath and let it out. Matt stood in his backyard, mud still clinging to his boots, surveying the damage from the storm and the changes within his own heart. The events of that wild, thunderous night lingered in every step he took and every glance Rowdy gave him. It was clear. If Rowdy was going to stay, things had to be different. Not just safer, but more welcoming for all of them. The idea started small, the way good ideas do. Matt sketched plans on the back of an old feed bill, drawings of tunnels made from hay bales, climbing trees crafted from downed branches, safe hiding spots, high perches. He read up on enrichment for wild animals, talked to animal control and sanctuaries, and asked local kids what would make the wild garden special. It took days to gather materials and recruit help. But soon, Matt and a small, ragtag crew of neighborhood children, plus Tom the mailman and Mrs. Kwan, who brought cookies and advice, were turning the yard into something new. A haven built not just for Rowdy, but for any creature that needed a place to belong. They worked together under the spring sun, hammering boards, stacking logs, digging holes for fresh brush and bushes. The kids painted signs, Bobcat Crossing, Luna's Hideout, Sock's Tunnel, and placed them around the yard. Matt, usually wary of attention, found himself laughing more, sharing stories about each cat's quirks, answering endless questions about Rowdy's habits and favorite toys. Even skeptical neighbors grew curious, stopping by to watch or drop off scrap lumber and old blankets. Through it all, the domestic cats were everywhere. Pepper prowling the perimeter like a foreman, Luna curling up in newly sunlit patches, Socks darting in and out of tunnels, his tail held high with pride. And Rowdy, always watchful, began to explore the yard with growing confidence, sniffing new scents and testing the strength of every branch. He learned quickly, climbing to the highest perch to survey his domain, disappearing into the brush when things got too loud, emerging to rub cautiously against Matt's leg before darting away again. One afternoon, Matt watched from the porch as Rowdy and Luna basked in the dappled shade beneath a birch tree. Pepper observed from a low-hanging branch, tail twitching as she pretended not to care. Socks tumbled through the brush with a child's toy, enticing Rowdy into a hesitant game of chase. The scene was peaceful, but there was energy, an unspoken understanding that this was a new beginning for them all. The neighborhood children started to visit more often, some shy, some bold, all fascinated by the wild kitten who had captured their imaginations. Matt showed them how to respect Rowdy's space, teaching that wildness was not something to fear, but something to admire from a safe distance. He watched as Rowdy, still untamed, still unpredictable, slowly became a symbol of hope and difference in Maple Hollow. But not everyone was convinced. Matt still heard whispers, still found notes on his porch. Keep your wild animal fenced. Don't let that bobcat near the school. He understood the fear, but now he had something stronger than fear. He had proof that wildness could live alongside safety. That difference could become a source of pride. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the green hills, Matt found Rowdy waiting by the porch steps. For a moment, the bobcat hesitated, then rubbed his flank against Matt's leg, the smallest gesture of trust yet. Matt smiled, heart swelling. "You're home, buddy, wild and all." Inside, the house had changed too. The cats moved together with a kind of choreography, teaching Rowdy the rules of their strange family. Pepper showed him how to sharpen his claws on the old scratching post. Luna curled around him during thunderstorms, and Socks led him on playful sprints down the hallway. Matt, once an outsider in his own life, now felt himself woven into the fabric of his family, a little battered, a little wild, but strong and together. Word of the wild garden spread through town. Some adults stayed wary, but the children saw only magic. They brought friends, sharing stories of Rowdy's rescue and transformation. Soon, the garden was full of laughter, the air alive with possibility. Matt hosted an open afternoon, inviting neighbors to walk the yard, meet the cats from a safe distance, and see for themselves what compassion, patience, and a willingness to change could create. One older man, Mr. Abrams, who had once left an angry note, stopped Matt as he was cleaning up. "I was wrong about you, son," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You gave that animal a chance. Maybe that's what this town needs." Matt nodded, humility and gratitude mixing in his chest. He realized Rowdy's journey wasn't just about survival, but about transformation, for himself, for his cats, for Maple Hollow. The line between wild and domestic, between outsider and family, had blurred in the best possible way. That night, as the first fireflies blinked in the wild garden, Matt sat on the porch steps. Rowdy curled beside him, the other cats forming a lazy heap nearby. For the first time, the boundaries of his home felt infinite, a place where wildness was not a threat, but a gift, where the heart could be both fierce and gentle, and where even the most unlikely family could thrive. Late autumn settled gently over Maple Hollow, painting the hills in burnt gold and smoky orange. Leaves drifted across the porch at Henderson House, swirling in quiet circles, catching on the boots of visitors who now stopped by as naturally as the breeze. The wild garden stood tall and tangled, grasses bending in the chill, the climbing trees now crowned with crimson. For Matt, the changing season marked something deeper, a sense of arrival, a realization that somehow the wildness he once feared had transformed his home into a place of belonging. One dusky evening, Matt sat on the front porch, coffee in hand, the steam curling in the fading light. His cats sprawled nearby, Pepper on the railing, Luna in a patch of late sun, socks curled up on the doormat. Rowdy, now longer and stronger, perched at the very top of the steps, his gold eyes fixed on the horizon, as if tracking mysteries only he could see. The air was thick with memories, and Matt let himself drift back, past the first wild night on the icy road, past chaos and doubt, past the storm and the uproar in town. He remembered how, not so long ago, he'd measured his days in chores and regret, afraid to reach out, afraid to be hurt again. But then Rowdy had come roaring into his life, and nothing, not grief, not loneliness, not the walls he'd built around himself, had stood a chance. As Matt watched the cats, he realized each had changed in their own way. Pepper, once prickly and territorial, now stood guard over all her siblings, her fierce heart open in new ways. Luna, gentle as ever, had become the soul of the group, her patience teaching them all how to accept difference. Socks, always the clown, now moved with a confidence that came from facing fear and finding joy on the other side. And Rowdy, the wild, untamable heart at the center of it all, had given each of them something they hadn't known they needed: the courage to stretch beyond comfort, to welcome the unknown. Matt's journal sat on his lap, open to a fresh page. He began to write, the words flowing easier than they had in years. "I used to think belonging was about sameness, about being safe, being accepted, blending in. But it's not. Belonging is what happens when you let difference in, when you make space for wildness, for fear, for things you can't control. It's messy, and sometimes it's loud, and sometimes you get your heart broken. But it's real, it's honest, and it's worth every minute." As the last light faded, Matt listened to the wind and the distant sound of children's laughter from the garden next door. He thought about all the things Rowdy had taught him, and all the things he'd tried to teach Rowdy in return. He knew now that Rowdy would never be a house cat, never content to curl up quietly for long, never tamed. But maybe, Matt realized, the lesson wasn't about taming at all. It was about loving fully, even what you couldn't hold. He glanced at the cats. Pepper kept watch from her high perch, Luna stretched out beside Rowdy, and Socks twitched in his sleep, dreaming of some new mischief. The lines that had once divided wild from domestic, outsider from family, had faded into insignificance. Matt felt his old pain, the divorce, the loneliness, the ache of wondering if he would ever feel whole again, slip away. In its place was a fierce gratitude for everything messy and beautiful that Rowdy had brought into his life. He recognized that the family they'd become was nothing he could have planned, nothing he would have dared to hope for. And that made it all the more precious. Rowdy stirred, ears pricked. He turned to look at Matt, eyes sharp, wild, and utterly present. In that gaze, Matt saw the lesson he'd struggled to learn since the night of the rescue. That real kinship is built not on control, but on respect. Not on taming, but on trust. He set his journal down and simply sat, feeling the weight and the wonder of it all. The porch was quiet, but alive with the energy of the cats, the scent of fallen leaves, the knowledge that everything had changed and that change had made them more whole. Matt realized, with a sudden clarity, that the greatest gift Rowdy had given him wasn't excitement or drama or even courage. It was the chance to let go of fear and make space for something wilder, a family that could hold difference and love at the same time. He whispered, almost without meaning to, "Thank you, Rowdy, for teaching me that belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about making room for all the wildness in others and in myself." As the sky darkened and the porch light blinked on, Matt watched his strange, beautiful family settle in around him, their shapes blurring together, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. He knew that whatever came next, another storm, another debate, another hard lesson, they would face it together, changed forever by the wild heart that had come home to Henderson House. The first snow arrived quietly, softening the world with a blanket of white that sparkled in the early morning sun. Henderson House looked different now, brighter somehow, even in winter's hush. Frost curled along the porch railings, icicles glistened from the wild garden's branches, and inside, the warmth was almost tangible, the air alive with the presence of 4 cats and 1 man forever changed by their story. On that morning, Matt stood by the window with his coffee, watching as Rowdy, long-limbed and powerful, but still unmistakably the Bobcat Kitten from that fateful night, bounded through the snow. Pepper trailed behind, stalking his footprints with dignified intent. Luna, gentle and graceful, leapt across drifts, her tail painting arcs in the air. Socks, the eternal clown, rolled and tumbled, sending powder flying. Matt smiled, heart full as he watched them play, wild and domestic blending seamlessly in the yard he'd worked so hard to transform. Children came, bundled in scarves and boots, pressing faces to the fence, eager for a glimpse of the wild bobcat and his housecat siblings. Their voices rang out in the cold. "There he is! Look at him climb! That's Rowdy." Matt welcomed them, sometimes telling the story of Rowdy's rescue, sometimes just listening as the kids made up their own tales. Parents and neighbors stopped by, a few bringing treats or handwritten notes, others still hesitant but curious, seeing for themselves that the wildness they'd feared had brought new life to their town. On weekends, Matt opened the garden gates, letting visitors see the tunnels and perches, the brush piles and hollow logs where cats could hide and play. He explained how he'd learned to balance safety with freedom, how Pepper, Luna, and Socks had taught Rowdy about trust, and how Rowdy's wildness had challenged the whole family to grow braver and more adaptable. Mrs. Kwan brought hot chocolate for the children. Tom the mailman offered stories about his own rescued animals. Even Mr. Abrams, who had once been the loudest critic, stopped by with a bag of old wool sweaters for the cats to sleep on, his eyes softer than Matt had ever seen. As the days grew shorter, Matt noticed subtle changes in the house cats. Pepper was more patient, allowing Rowdy to share her spot by the window. Luna became bolder, often leading the others in new games. Socks, ever playful, seemed to take pride in Rowdy's trust, always nearby when the Bobcat tried something new. Matt, too, felt different. Lighter, less guarded, more open to surprises and setbacks alike. The house that once echoed with loneliness now pulsed with laughter, movement, and the gentle rhythm of many paws. Rowdy never lost his wildness. Sometimes, when visitors grew too loud or the world seemed too small, he would vanish into the thickest part of the garden, returning only when quiet returned. He rarely allowed himself to be petted, but on cold evenings he would settle nearby, his breath fogging the window glass, his presence a steady, grounding comfort. Matt learned to accept these boundaries, understanding that love and respect sometimes meant standing back, giving space, letting the wild thing be wild. One afternoon, after a gentle snowfall, Matt sat with his journal, reflecting on how far they'd all come. He wrote, "A family is not a perfect circle. It's more like a patchwork, made of differences stitched together by patience and hope. Rowdy will always be a bobcat, sometimes shy, sometimes fierce, but always true to himself. The house cats, once ordinary, are now braver and more accepting, their bonds stronger for having faced the unknown together. And I've learned that the heart's capacity to welcome difference is the truest sign of love." He realized that Henderson House was no longer just a shelter from the world. It had become a beacon, a place where kindness mattered more than caution, where patience could bridge the widest gaps, where the willingness to take risks, to care deeply even in the face of uncertainty, had changed everything. As winter deepened, word spread beyond Maple Hollow. People from nearby towns came to hear Matt's story, to see Rowdy and his feline family. Some left food and notes. A few adopted animals of their own, inspired by the tale of a wild bobcat who had found a home among house cats. Matt was asked to speak at the school, and he did. His words simple but heartfelt. True family is not about being the same. It's about making room for what's different, and learning that, in doing so, we all become a little more whole. He saw the lesson ripple out into his community. Neighbors began to look out for stray animals. Children grew less afraid of what was different, more curious about the wild world around them. Henderson House became a gathering place, a symbol of hope and acceptance, a story passed from one person to another on cold winter nights. One evening, as the snow fell and the world was silent except for the distant laughter of children, Matt watched Rowdy gaze out at the horizon. The bobcat's eyes shone with all the mystery and courage that had brought them together. Matt felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest, the knowledge that the wildest hearts often bring out the best in us all, and that making space for difference is where true belonging begins. He turned to his listeners, both in his living room and out there in the wider world, and offered one last message. If you're ever afraid of what's wild or unknown, remember Rowdy. Remember what can happen when you choose kindness over fear, patience over control. The heart is strongest not when it closes, but when it opens, And sometimes, letting in a little wildness is the bravest, most hopeful thing you can do. As the family, Pepper, Luna, Socks, Rowdy, and Matt, gathered by the frosted window, Henderson House glowed with the promise of every story. That difference is a gift, and that in welcoming it, we build the only kind of home that ever truly matters.